A U.S. government shutdown is looming. And yeah, I know, we've seen this movie before. But this time, there's a totally different kind of threat. We're not just talking about closed parks or furloughed workers. This time, it's about the entire U.S. economy suddenly losing its sight.
So let's really get into this, because this is the big question we're tackling. Imagine you're driving a car, going pretty fast, and all of a sudden your gauges, your speedometer, your fuel, your engine temp, they all just cut out. Blank. That's pretty much the risk the U.S. economy is facing right now.
All right, first things first, let's get on the same page about what's actually happening here. How does a government shutdown even start, and what's the big political fight about this time around?
So, a government shutdown is basically what happens when Congress just can't agree on a budget to keep the lights on for federal agencies. Without that money, everything considered non-essential just grinds to a halt. And the deadline for this is September 30th. After that, things start going dark.
This year, the whole standoff is really about healthcare funding. On one side, you have Democrats who are pushing to reverse cuts to Medicaid and keep the tax credits for Obamacare plans. On the other side, you've got Republicans who, they need some Democratic votes to get past the Senate filibuster, but they just don't agree on these spending levels. It's a classic political stalemate, with the entire government's operation just hanging in the balance. Now, look, shutdowns are not new. Back in 2013, we had a 16-day shutdown that delayed some key economic reports by a couple of weeks. Then there was the big one in 2018-2019, the longest ever, which pushed back GDP reports by a whole month. But what's so different this time is that the main threat isn't just a delay. It's the risk of a complete and total economic data blackout, happening right when we need that clarity the most.
And that brings us to the real heart of the problem, what we're calling the Great Data Blackout. This is where the story gets wild, because it's about the very information that our entire financial system runs on just vanishing.
Just look at what's at risk here. We're talking about the jobs report, our best look at the labor market, gone. The consumer price index, our main way of measuring inflation, gone. These aren't just abstract numbers. These are the fundamental signals that policymakers, businesses, and investors use to make decisions worth trillions of dollars. And hey, don't take my word for it. This is a direct quote from the Department of Labor's own 73-page contingency plan. It couldn't be more blunt. No funding, no data. The Bureau of Labor Statistics is going to suspend all its operations, and its website won't even be updated. The dashboard truly goes dark. And you have to remember, behind this data blackout are actual people. We're talking about 13,000 highly specialized employees at the Bureau of Labor Statistics. These are the folks who actually go out, collect, clean, and publish all this vital information. And they're just going to be sent home, unable to do their jobs.
So what happens when you just turn off the data spigot? Well, the consequences start to ripple out, and they affect everything from the Fed's policy to market stability. Let's break down the fallout.
The best way, really the only way to describe the situation for the Federal Reserve is flying blind. The Fed's entire modern strategy for setting interest rates is what they call data dependent. They absolutely need to see the latest jobs and inflation numbers to know what to do. Without that data, they are quite literally steering the world's largest economy completely in the dark.
This uncertainty just completely corners the Fed, and it leaves them with some pretty bad options. They'll have to start relying on less reliable private sector data, stuff like the ADP payroll reports, which frankly just aren't as good. This makes it way more likely that they'll just have to hit pause on any planned interest rate moves, which only adds another layer of fog to the economic outlook.
And beyond the Fed, the shutdown itself acts like a direct brake on the economy. As you can see here, the projections show that for every single week the government is shut down, it shaves off about 0.1 to 0.2 percentage points from GDP growth. It's a totally self-inflicted economic wound that just gets worse the longer it goes on.
And here's something new, and honestly, a lot more alarming. In past shutdowns, federal workers who were furloughed eventually got back pay. This time, the administration has told agencies to actually prepare for permanent layoffs. This could turn what was a temporary disruption for up to 900,000 workers into a permanent blow to payrolls and consumer confidence. That's a huge deal.
So, how are the markets reacting to all this? Well, pretty much as you'd expect. When you're faced with this much uncertainty and a shaky US dollar, investors run for cover in so-called safe haven assets. Gold prices have just surged to record highs, hitting over $3,800 an ounce. It's a classic signal that fear is on the rise.
So in a world where there's no official data, how do investors and businesses even operate? They're being forced to write a completely new playbook for how to navigate all this uncertainty.
So the market has to adapt fast. First, everyone becomes way more dependent on private data, even if it's not perfect. Second, they have to get ready for what you might call revision whiplash, because when the government finally reopens, that first batch of data is going to be messy. And finally, everyone just has to brace for a ton of volatility, because markets are going to overreact to every little scrap of information they can get their hands on.
And this all brings us to our final, and maybe most critical question. We kind of take for granted the government's role in providing objective, nonpartisan data. But when that data goes dark, it creates a vacuum. So who fills that void? Who gets to write the story about whether our economy is strong or weak? It leaves us flying blind in more ways than one.